that shows up on the screen to their name, their chapter, and their pronouns. That will help us to make sure we're referring to people the way they would like to be referred to. All right. Welcome to Signature 2020. We're so excited to have all of you here this week and to see so many of you back again for another day. I'm Morgan, I'm the district president, and we are joined here today by our district counselors, Sarah and Alexis, who will be talking about how to supervise and to work through difficult conversations. So I will go ahead and turn the time over to you guys.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm really excited to be here today. And I'm Sarah. Just a little bit about me before we get our presentation started. I am an alumna from UCLA. I have a degree in education and I'm currently a 4th grade teacher. And I think that's the pertinent stuff for what you need to know. I play clarinet. Alexis?
Yes, and I'm Alexis. I'm the other Western District counselor. I'm an alumna from Eta Omega, which is at Fresno State in California. Go Dogs! And my degrees are in criminology, and then I kind of did a 180 and did a master's in counseling. And so currently I am an academic advisor for the College of Science and Math at Fresno State. And yeah, it's a wild ride doing everything virtual. My instruments are bass guitar, and I played trumpet and mellophone and marching band, so it was super fun. So we're gonna go ahead and just get started. Our presentation tonight is really all about supervising and specifically, addressing concerns and what that looks like. So our goals for today, we're gonna be reflecting on some past experiences of different supervising opportunities, either maybe you've had or you've been in a part of, either you've been supervised or supervising somebody, and their effect either on your mood, on you, or on others, or on the environment and things like that. We're gonna then transition and talk about a really awesome six-step process to communicate effectively, of which I cannot do right now. And so that 6-step process, we're then going to start applying to various scenarios that Sarah and I have come up with. And then those will be in breakout rooms, and then we'll come back to the whole group and we'll go through and we'll discuss what you guys discussed in those breakout rooms and some of the outcomes. So that's the agenda for today. So everyone just kind of take a look at these words. Take care of it, fix it now. You want an extension? This is a big problem. Next time, do it right. Why did you do that? I don't have time for you, figure it out. This isn't good enough. So these are phrases, words. Tell me a little bit, just kind of, you can either do this in the chat if you feel comfortable there, or maybe, unmute yourself and just kind of chat. But when you see these phrases, what kind of thoughts come to mind? How does it make you feel?
I think it's pretty dismissive and condescending and doesn't really take in, it's not really starting a conversation. It's kind of just like automatically placing the blame on that person.
Yeah.
The words don't leave any room to have a discussion on how to improve or how to do it better. It's all very condescending, like, how dare you do this, instead of saying, well, maybe we did something wrong this time. How can we make it better or improve for the next time?
Exactly.
It makes me feel belittled.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what I'm doing.
It doesn't take into account the situation either. Like there's no room for any kind of interpretation. It's just either you've done it right or you've done it wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Black and white thinking, that kind of thing. All of those were actually, thoughts and feelings that I had too. Whenever I see these, obviously, like if somebody were to actually say these to you, you wouldn't necessarily see punctuation. But whenever I see things like fix it now, can you imagine someone saying that to you? Or have you said that to somebody else, So in kind of taking into account these words, or maybe something, things that are similar, think back to some times where you've maybe been in a situation where you've had a supervisor. Have you ever had somebody talk to you this way, either a supervisor or someone in like a leadership role? And then, kind of how did you react to that? I know I can share for myself. I've definitely had times where I've had supervisor who was a lot of the just take care of it, just get it done, just do it, without any sort of paying attention or mind to any context, right? Like anything else that I was doing, other responsibilities I'd been given, right? So sometimes you can just feel like, do you not understand like what anything is, what's happening at all, right? So I've definitely had supervisors who have kind of gone that more just deal with it, dismissive, right? I think someone said dismissive. So I've definitely experienced that.
I would love to share. I was reflecting and thought of something I hadn't thought of yet while having made this presentation. I had a supervisor once who I felt she just wasn't consistent. And I think that was what really bothered me. Is there was an instance where her supervisor and her had disagreed about something and it impacted the work that I was supposed to be doing. And so that felt very, she didn't recognize that she'd given me misinformation, and it felt very cold and disconnected between her and me. But then I would see how she worked with other people and was giving them second chances. And so I think that was very frustrating to work for someone who was not consistent about how they supervised.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the words on here don't necessarily take into account things like that, right? Like just consistency, empathy, which kind of leads us into this next portion of the presentation, which obviously, spending time on that last side of like all the negative things, right? Things that you're not necessarily wanting to think about, but we've all experienced. And so I think within that, or kind of like caught between the lines on that last slide, is the good things that you want to see out of people, things that you admire, things that you respect, ways that you want to be treated. And so think about a supervisor that you looked up to or look up to, right? Tell us a little bit about it. Could be a boss or it could be a mentor. Maybe just kind of share around right now about, what did they do to gain your respect? What aspects of the supervising style did you like and maybe you emulate for yourself?
I know that in the first job that I worked was at a paddleboard rental company, and it was just a summer gig I don't work there anymore, but I did a couple years in high school. And I really liked that she always made it clear that she would always back me up if something went wrong. And a lot of times I was in charge of kind of the reception area, and I was doing a lot of schedule decisions and handling people's transactions and stuff. And sometimes things happened with their reservation or something didn't go as planned. And even if it was my fault, my supervisor, even though she knew that, and afterward, of course, we would talk about it and find out ways that I could improve, but she never made me feel bad on the spot in front of anyone about having made a decision that wasn't super great. And she always went to bat for me, which I really appreciated, and I still do.
One of mine.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go for it.
Okay.
Well, one of mine always made time for everyone and made it seem like everyone was very important, even down to the lowest of her, her supervisees, inferiors could come to her, and she would set everything aside and take diligent notes if you came to talk to her, even though she was doing 3 people's work and sometimes slept in her office on a yoga mat on the floor. She still made it feel like she always had time for you.
I have my supervisor currently at my job, and I think the way that she gained my trust was when I had first gotten this job originally. I was just a summer intern, And she just knew so much about the job. We teach hunting courses and gun safety courses. And so I think she just knew so much and had so many stories of her own that I respected that. And then obviously, like, me and the other interns, like, we're not perfect. We broke a couple of like items and stuff like that. And she was just so caring and understanding. And I think that's what made me really start to connect with her. And then, you know, obviously when she offered me the job, I was totally okay with that, because when I had made mistakes, she didn't make me feel down about it. She was able to tell me, hey, like, it's okay, we make mistakes. And so I think that's what made me feel better as a person.
So it sounds like we've got these positive experiences with people who showed they cared, whether it was their words or that backing you up, showing you through the time that they shared with you and were happy to use to develop the relationship with you. Was there anyone else who wanted to share an experience before we move on? Okay, so before being an educator, I was a summer camp counselor for 3 years when I was a student at UCLA, and I received this resource that I'm really excited to share with you today. You will get a copy of it in your email during our presentation, but feel free to take notes. Just know that it's coming. And the purpose of this document is to help you have a respectful and productive conversation with someone who might be underperforming, or you're just noticing something's off or there's a problem you want to address. So there are 6 steps. The first step, when you want to have that conversation addressing a concern, I'm going to say even before explaining what you've observed, is you want to ask the person who you need to speak with to have a conversation with you. And I would highly encourage you to do it in a neutral place. So I wouldn't say, hey, come over to my dorm and let's talk, because that's an imbalance of power. So I would really encourage you to find a place maybe on campus. Obviously, I know right now with things being virtual, that might be for future supervising experiences. But just remember, you want to have a neutral space to have the conversation. Once you are there, step 1 is to explain what you've observed. So when you begin that conversation, you want to start with what you've seen. And you want to be specific, focusing not on emotions, but on the behavior. I have an example here. I imagined a situation where my treasurer was not submitting agenda items on time, and it happened more than once. So saying, Elisa, I noticed you haven't been submitting your agenda items on time is more productive than, Elisa, I'm really upset that you haven't been replying to my emails. The first statement is more objective, and it's more effective because it's specific to the fact that it's the agenda items and you're not putting your emotions into it. By having that calm, objective perspective at the beginning of the conversation is going to help you a lot in finding a solution. After you've explained what you've observed, then you're going to express concern. And this is especially powerful when the person you're speaking with has demonstrated success, because you're going to try and hook it to a compliment. So I have 2 examples here about being concerned because we've seen the person be very organized and quick to respond. Or you might say, you know, I know that you do better than this. I've seen these detailed updates, so I'm concerned. What I'd like to point out is both of these, again, have that objective observation. You're pointing out something you've seen in the past and mentioning, you know, something's changed, and that's the concern. And hopefully this will help you connect with the person you're speaking to, so that as we move forward through the process, you are able to find that solution and have them really open up. The third step is to ask good questions, which is one of my favorite things. So you're trying to explore what's going on. It's important, again, that you're focusing on this person's commitment or emotional well-being, which definitely is determined by whatever's going on. You don't need to be focused on their performance. If I'm talking to Elisa and I say, why aren't you responding to my emails? That's kind of getting back into the purple slide with the harsher comments. Something bigger must be going on if she's really not able to respond to an email. So I might say, have you noticed that too? Honestly, I love saying something like that to just get the person to own up to the fact, you know what? Yeah, you're right. And honestly, though, commonly they will start talking like, you know, this is what's going on. If they don't, you can ask what's going on. And I think especially since step 1 and 2 have to do with seeing that change, asking what's changed since some event, maybe it's them getting elected, maybe it was since midterms, whatever the case may be, you can ask what's changed for you since da-da-da-da. While you're asking these questions, I encourage you, depending on the situation, you might just jot some notes down because you want to be an active listener, which is that next step. But you want to just hear them. Something is going on with this person if there is a problem. And as a supervisor, you do want to give them that time. You want to show them that you are caring about them and that the conversation is not to get them in trouble, it's to find a solution. So make sure that going into the conversation, you're in a headspace to say, I'm not going to jump to conclusions, and I'm not going to try, I'm really just going to try and understand them. I would suggest that you avoid saying, I know what you're feeling, because that can actually be, that might push them away more than, you know, you would think it would just by those words. Make sure that when you're actively listening that you can respond back to them. You might repeat back to them what you've heard to say, you know, I'm hearing this. Am I understanding you right? And then the overall goal in step 4 is you want the person to identify what's getting in their way. You want to help them through good questioning and respectful listening to open up about whatever is that root cause of the issue. Because once you do that, you go to step 5. And step 5 says hold them accountable, but really step 5 is about putting some responsibility on them to solve the problem. Once you have identified whatever has triggered the problem, then you work together to see how the person can solve the problem with support from you. It's not your job to solve the problem, but you can provide support so that they can solve it. So the first thing that you can ask is, what are you going to do and commit to do that I can hold you accountable for? You might not say the second part. The shortened version is on the screen. Then after they've done that, I would definitely take notes there, because as the supervisor, you want to be able to check in on them and have notes on, what do I need to confirm they've done? What did they say they would do? Once you've allowed them to share what they're going to commit to, then you can ask, how can I help you? What do you need from me to be successful? Sometimes they don't know. I've used this structure a couple of times, and sometimes the person you're talking to might not know. And so I would encourage you to offer some time for them to think about that. For instance, you might talk to them a couple days later and just mention, was there anything you've thought of in the past days that I could be doing to support you? And that kind of gets into step 6. Step 5 is really the end of this conversation. So from 1 to 5, this is the sit down, it's just the two of us, problem solving and addressing the concern. So it's important that you have a closure. There are some examples in the packet that I'm going to be emailing you Something you might say is, Elisa, I'm so glad we had this talk. I understand now what's going on, and I can see how you've had a hard time responding to my emails. But just make sure that there is some closure and it's positive. After the conversation, as the supervisor, you need to follow up and get back to people. This just means it's time for a check-in, and it's a chance for you to offer more support and understanding. That might be the conversation where you say, is there anything that you need from me now? It might just be, how are things going, and let them talk again. Something you might say is, I appreciate your effort, or I see that you're really making an effort, and sometimes I find it is a strongest comment to say other people or many people can tell how hard you're working, and that it's benefiting the whole chapter. These are our 6 steps. They work, and it's because they provide that pathway for a caring, respectful conversation. The next step in our workshop, or the next thing in our workshop, is you're going to practice using these 6 steps in breakout rooms. I'm going to have Alexis explain a little bit more about that while I send the email.
All right, so you guys have all already been paired off into breakout rooms. There's just going to be 2 of you in 3 breakout rooms, and Sarah and I will float. Right now, she is sending you an email with the PDF of the 6 steps. You guys can refer to that and reflect. And then it'll also include 3 different scenarios that you're going to be going through, and just using those 6 steps, and with your own kind of inflection and iteration of it. It doesn't have to be the same, role play each time, but you guys will be acting out a role and going through each scenario, and kind of, if you finish early, then go ahead and discuss the questions amongst each other, and then come back to the main room where we will then all discuss together.
Before we go into breakout rooms, I would just like to say, I would like you to try being both the supervisor and the person that needed to be talked to. So make sure you switch. And it says, remember, no negating. So if I'm Elisa and Alexis has said to me, I've noticed you haven't been responding to my emails, I'm not going to say in this role play, yes, I have. So if someone says something, we're not going to negate it. You're going to have to talk through whatever's going on. And we have created 3 situations that really could be happening at your chapters. So act out what you think that person really would say. You don't need to get, we're not going for, what is it? Daytime. Oh my gosh, I can't think. Soap opera. We want a real practice conversation.
Awesome. So you've already sent it, I'm assuming, Sarah?
Yes, you should have it in your email.
Awesome. Did everybody get it before we kind of send you guys off? Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause recording.
You just came back from your breakout rooms, and we wanted to check in with you about those questions. Did anyone get to the questions to discuss? Okay, so some did, some didn't. So the scenarios are briefly summarized on the right, and the first question was just, who do you think should reach out to these sisters? Daisy, Jamie, or Ryan? And if you'll just unmute, or if you post something in the chat, if Alexis, if you can read that.
Well, in Zeta Xi, we don't have like a director of sisterhood. We have a guardian in the sisterhood. And I think that it would be best for the guardian in the sisterhood to reach out to Ryan, especially because it's like less of a, like, I feel like it's less of a president thing. It's more of a like, okay, take a break for your mental health, figure it out in a little while. Don't like overbearing yourself type of thing.
Ryan is the person who is director of sisterhood, right?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, no, I was going to say, I would imagine that that would be like your moderator of the sisterhood. Is that
like our guardian of the sisterhood?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So if it was that, who would you think should reach out to Ryan?
Probably the president next.
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say we also have an ethics officer. Why it's not necessarily like related to ethics. I would say maybe the president. Just so they could have like an informal talking to about it, as opposed because like I wouldn't say it's like really ethically related. It's more just like taking on too many responsibilities at once.
Yeah. Did anybody get to the Ryan conversation? So for the supervisors in that conversation, what was the concern you put out there?
Like he's doing too much, and it's maybe not just gonna affect his like performance and his other things, but it's maybe starting to affect his mental health, and maybe for the health of the chapter, he should try to just focus on being the director of the sisterhood instead of trying to be the director of the sisterhood and take on a fundraiser and do all these other things. Obviously, he's very talented and very smart in everything he does, but he's just trying to do too much at once.
Without saying names, can y'all give a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Do you know someone like Ryan? Yeah. We need to make sure someone says something to Ryan. How about, I do want to add in, so Ryan, he hasn't actually had a problem with his responsibilities, right? That scenario was, we're noticing he's tired, he's maybe low energy, not as excited about things. If you were a close friend of Ryan's, you might have the same conversation. It might be less formal. If you guys are out to lunch together, you might just say like, hey, I've noticed this and I'm worried about you. That's step 1 and 2. The only reason I suggest that is because Ryan hasn't done something that a supervisor needs to address. But the president could address it. I think if the president addressed it, they might want to spin it toward, I'm concerned that the quantity of things you've taken on might get in the way of, fulfilling all of these goals and projects that you're working on. How about for Daisy or Jamie?
I feel like the best person for Jamie would be really helpful if her big was on the council. I feel like that would be most helpful. My big was on the council, and she was always the one that was able to talk to me about that stuff. But obviously, if her big is not on the council, I feel like that's a really good job for the president, just looking after his or her chapter and being able to make sure that Jamie is okay.
Can you clarify what you mean when you say council? Do you mean officer board?
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so just like, if their big was president or VPSP or treasurer or anything like that, just so that later they could report back to the rest of them and be like, hey, this is what's going on with Jamie. And I just feel like we're able to open up to our bigs a little bit more than anyone else.
For Jamie, I'd say probably we have our parliamentarian is in charge of attendance. So I would say the big would be a good choice, but if they're not on the executive council, I would say the parliamentarian, because they would be able to help more if there's a conflict or something going on with attendance.
I think Janelle brings up a good point that where Ryan's situation is not specific to an office, Jamie's issue that needs to be addressed is attendance. So if your chapter has a secretary that does attendance, or parliamentarian, or if president does it, whoever is in charge of attendance should address attendance issues. If they're not the president, they will report to the president like, this is what's going on with attendance and this is what I did. So, even if you're not president, these supervising skills really can help. I'm going to move on because we had lots of questions and it's getting late. But for Daisy, I would say president, because again, it's supervising. You want, that's who's supervising her. Okay. Yeah, wait. I'm so sorry. I have my video over the words. Okay, take 3. Just any feedback. What was working for you in the conversations? Was there anything you tried that felt like, oh, I don't want to do this again? Did it all go mediocre but good? Okay, I'm gonna spin it. What was the hardest part of these conversations?
For me, I would say just bringing up what you noticed in that person, because it's hard to have these conversations, and it's hard to try to tell them what you've observed in their behavior. Like working on as when you can agree on a problem and start to work on it together, it becomes easier. But I would say like the initial start of that conversation is always the hardest part.
I feel like we've had these conversations before and stuff in our chapter, but I think that the hardest part of it is like staying objective and not bringing your emotions into it, and not being on the offensive, but being kind of more on the defensive. Instead of being like, this is what you did, be like, hey, this is what I've noticed. Have you noticed it too?
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I have a tip for you. I can't imagine you're going to have a problem that feels so urgent you'd have to solve it in the moment. But let's say something happened and you knew you needed to address it, but it also could wait a day. If someone can think of an example, let me know. You are in the position to say, I want to solve problems when I am in a calm and productive when I have a peace of mind to make calm and productive solutions. So I am going to solve this, but I need some time to calm down. That is definitely something I've done with my students, and it shows that you're not ignoring a problem, that you are going to address it, but that you also value the quality of your solution.
And that you also, respect their need to be in a space to hear the information, right? I just think kind of like just assuming that was just a thing we all would do, but then realizing that I wasn't even putting that into practice. Like, just because you might be ready to have a conversation doesn't necessarily mean somebody else is in the state to do it. So just like Sarah said, having something like in the moment, might not necessarily be good for you, but it also might not necessarily be good for the other person. And so just making sure to like clarify that it's a good opportunity for you guys to have a conversation. And to what my coworker actually, she told me once we were having an issue with one of our interns, and she said that she had a carefrontation. And I was like, carefrontation, like that, because it when you talk about like having to supervise somebody or having to have a conversation that's not maybe not all flowers and sunshine, right? Like you think of it as like I'm confronting them. I don't like that's a negative connotation. I don't like the way that feels, right? None of us like the way it feels to talk to somebody about something that might be painful or might bring up some issues. But when you do it from like a caring standpoint, it becomes carefrontation. And so I kind of think about that word now in the way that I like work with others if I'm having to like come up with a way to kind of discuss an issue that I'm seeing.
How did these conversations compare to that harsher supervising talk that we looked at earlier? Do you see a difference? Okay. Anything that stands out about it, or just maybe a thought that you had about that?
I would say there's like definitely more communication from both sides. And you're not making anyone angry when you communicate like this, because it's not really like you're placing the blame on them. Instead, it's like, this is what I've noticed. What can we do to help you? And if there's something we can do to help you later on, just let me know. So it's definitely much more of a conversation that you're both having, instead of just dismissing that person and telling them to fix it.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say too. It's kind of the exact opposite of the harsh supervising from earlier, because this is, instead of just saying there's a problem, you're the problem, you're saying let's solve the problem. Like, how are we going to actually do something about it, instead of just being like, okay, you're a problem and you've done something wrong.
Absolutely. I'm going to move on. I will say we are at 8:01 Western time. If anyone needs to leave, you can, but we are almost done. So if you can stay, we'd love that. What do you think you might have to do this fall to adapt to an online format in regards to this 6-step process?
You'd have to, the way that you communicate would be different, because you'd either want to do a Zoom call or a video call of some sort, or a phone call with them, and because you can't sit down and talk, and you don't want to just text them or message them because you can't convey tone that way, and they might take something you say as sarcastic or mean or rude, and you did not mean it that way at all. So it just, you'd have to figure out a new way to have these conversations. And finding a time when you're both free might be a little bit more difficult as well, because being online and everything, people's schedules are weird.
I think you bring up a ton of great points, Janelle. Thank you. I'm sure each of us can think of a time we read a text and thought, what? And it was because of the tone we read it in. I'd like to,
sorry. That, and I want to bring up something too, is not everybody sees things the same way. I see the thumbs up sign in a negative way, but not everybody does the thumbs up sign. And I actually have to actively train myself to be like, this person is not dismissing me. They're not, because it's weird, it's irrational. But I consider myself a relatively rational person when it comes to interpersonal communication. But for some reason, the thumbs up emoji, I get triggered by it a little bit. So not everybody is on the same page with even just emojis and like text messages. So I think that that's really important that you bring that up, especially in a virtual world. If you're starting off in a message standpoint versus a face-to-face or even just a video-to-video, there's a lot between the lines that we have to remember.
That is such a good point. Alexis, you made me think of something I always read in a, dismissive. If someone says sure to me as their answer and they mean yes, and that's all they mean, I've always read that in a, like, sure. I don't know why.
Yeah, no. And because of that, I'm over the top with my punctuation and emojis and things like that, because it's the only way for me to convey intent, where it cannot get misconstrued. You cannot say sure smiley face and think that I'm mad.
Yeah. Something I did want to suggest, especially because of this online format most schools are going to be facing in fall, you can't quite have that same neutral space of going to the cafe on campus or a music classroom and then being in a Zoom room one-on-one. When you leave, if the person has maybe become upset at you, maybe by step 2, the person really wasn't in a place to hear what you had to say. We don't want to have you in a bad position because you were in a Zoom room one-on-one. So if you think that's the case, if you think that will be the case, you could reach out to your chapter sponsor, who might be a neutral third person who could just join into, and the easiest way to explain why your sponsor is there is just the sponsor is making sure that our chapter is thriving and wants to be part of the solutions process, and you can loop them in as you just want them there as a third neutral support. Okay, I think we have one more question. What do you think you could do to proactively prevent these scenarios from happening in your chapter? Let's go one by one. So Daisy, VPSP, not really doing her work and saying like, I'll take care of it, not delegating, right? How could we prevent that from happening in the first place?
I think you need buy-in from everyone so that you don't get to a point where somebody just either feels like they have to take it on all by themselves or feels like they want to or need to take it on all by themselves. Because she has a whole committee that should be there to help her come up with a plan, and they should all be working on a different piece of it. So like everyone has to play a part here so that we're not making it so that one person is in charge of everything. Although they are the person who's the go-to and are kind of overseeing their committee, but everyone else needs to help out too.
I actually think that that's really important too. Sorry, Sam, to cut you off. To kind of address that, I actually have told my supervisor on numerous occasions, my boss, I'm really bad at delegating. As a person, I don't want to burden people. So sometimes I will overwhelm myself simply so I don't have to overwhelm somebody else or even give anybody else something that I think I should just be able to do myself, right? So I have unrealistic expectations sometimes of the amount of time or the amount of effort I'm gonna be able to put into something, and I struggle with delegation. And so I've actually had to have a conversation with my supervisor. So this is something that for you guys, if you're gonna be, leading other people, it's like having a conversation with your chapter officers about what their strengths and challenges are, and have it be in a really great, like, share your own challenges. Like, I'm being very vulnerable and saying I am bad at delegating, like really bad at it. And to where I have to and there's all sorts of reasons why, right? And I can go into those not here, but I went into that with my supervisor and I was like, this is what I need from you to be supported. This about me, and so this is what I need from you, right? So it's like having that conversation with Daisy about what do you feel are some of your, but even before she gets into her office, right? Like, or as she's taking her office, what do you feel are some challenges that you have, or what are some strengths that you have, and let's work on those, right? Having that conversation before proactively, so that maybe she kind of gets to the point where she just says, I'm working on it, and doesn't necessarily give a update. So something to consider.
You have made me think of something, and I feel like it's kind of tangential to this. That might inform questions you ask your chapter president during elections of how can you provide support based on, maybe you ask candidates in advance, what are the challenges that you foresee or your weaknesses? I will share mine. I'm horrible at asking for help. And I would not own up to that when I was an active sister. I knew it, but I would not own up to it until after I graduated, and I had to just kind of look at that. But I would encourage you to think about how can you help the chapter president or find a chapter president who can at least address, acknowledge, and do their best at supporting, the various officers you'll have. What did we say for this? Preventing?
I think, Sam, you were going to say something too. Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
We were both talking at the same time, so go.
No, I think what you said was awesome about proactively talking to that officer before they even enter their role. Definitely, and then even after that, checking up with them every so often, like having a weekly check-in with the officers is very important, and asking what you can do to help them, and just making sure they know it's okay for them to delegate work, because as you said, Alexis, you're bad at delegating, and they might not want to disclose that to me. So just letting them know it's okay that they can do that is also important.
I'd like to add on, by having that conversation early, then if there is a concern, they've already started having vulnerable conversations with you. So addressing the concern is not this first vulnerable, uncomfortable conversation. They already know, they've shared their weakness. I've shared mine. This is not a conversation about black and white, good, bad, whatever. It's, we want to solve a problem. For time's sake, I feel like moving forward, but something you can bring back to your chapter is brainstorming how you can preventatively plan. How you can proactively prevent the Jamie and Ryan scenarios. and maybe something else, maybe brainstorming something that happened last year that you want to avoid happening again this year. The last thing that we had was a little reflection that we'd love to have you all post in the chat. Specifically thinking about fall being virtual, what is one way you can put these skills into practice? And we'll just give you a minute. I was going to read these out loud, Alexis, or at least kind of share the point just so that viewers abstract. So I see having a phone call or video call with someone who's struggling, kind of like Ryan, to make sure that they're okay. Yeah, and it not just being about chapter or business, it might be something you're noticing, checking on their mental health, making sure they know their resources, checking on physical health, especially with being possibly, quarantined in their house all the time. They hopefully will really appreciate that, and it'll strengthen your chapter and the connections between you all. Checking in with people. Yeah, Emma mentioned that there's so much going on right now that people have to take on, and we're processing, and it's a lot. And by checking in, she's saying we can identify problems before they become too big. Absolutely. So that's that preventative goal. Weekly check-ins. I teach fourth grade, as I think I said earlier, and I'm just like, I'm like the emoji with the heart eyes. I'm like, oh, look at how long these responses are. Conversation through appropriate platforms. Absolutely, Sam. Yeah. So just please be really thoughtful about where are you having these conversations. We've already talked about not having the 6-step conversation through text, but even just being careful. You don't want business to be via text, or just, yes, whatever the platform is that your chapter has said that they're going to use for any kind of business. Make sure that that's happening. Making sure both parties are mentally in a place to have that conversation is really important. And supervisors, I think Sam said supervisors consistently letting members know that they're there for them, but also every time that the supervisor does show up is going to kind of show people tenfold, oh wow, they're really there. Objectivity. Yeah, that's really important. Having someone who can have that objectivity. I would highly encourage you to share the Tau Beta self-care with your chapter. It is just a little, I don't want to say crumb, but it's something to start with, especially because we know how hard the times are right now. if someone in your chapter might benefit from it, really encourage them to check that out. I don't know about you, but I am a Ryan and I will do everything. And then I want to burn out, or I do burn out. I don't want to burn out.
Well, and I think too, it's important that maybe a lot of us see ourselves in Ryan, but not every chapter member is Ryan, right? And so
Yes.
there's varying levels of effort and engagement from different chapter members. I think as a supervisor, as a leader, you understand that different people access TBSigma differently and
Yep.
for different reasons. So not projecting your beliefs about what a sister is and always should be on every single member, and like having that objectivity that there are different ways to relate to TBSigma and to other sisters, and just keeping that in mind.
That is so important. And I remember thinking everyone should be gung-ho back in the day.
I was that person. I can look back on it now and being like, man, like I got it all together, but you know, you just think that everybody's supposed to be like that. And so I think it's important to know that, like, it as much helping other people understand where their struggles and challenges might be, but also understanding where your own biases are, right? And like always constantly reflecting, which is why it's really good for the pause. Take the pause, right? If there's a situation that you're in and you're like, I need to talk to this person now. No, pause. Check your own self, check the view that you're having of the situation, and reflect on how you could be projecting, or, you know, am I really seeing the situation for what it is before then talking with somebody?
I think this is what you're saying, Alexis, but I want to revoice it. Just making sure you don't bring up concerns that are like, if you are the supervisor and you're having that concerns conversation, be careful that you're not bringing up a concern because it's what you want them to be doing, but because there's actually an issue. Yeah. Something that really helped me with feeling like everyone should be doing everything, because that's how I was, and I didn't get it until I graduated and I was DO. I just tried to get into the mindset of, I'm going to do this and I hope people show up, and whoever shows up, that's awesome, and hopefully it'll spread. So just having, you know, there's obviously attendance minimums and dues, but if you are a Ryan and you have difficulty with that, just try and get in that mindset of whoever's going to show up, this is going to be great for them. I see 2 more comments I just wanted to share about making sure that you're using Zoom meetings, because you can see people's facial expressions, which is really important. So that's something, please encourage them to have their camera on. You know, if they don't put their camera on, then it's like a phone call, which would still be better than text, but is still challenging. And then I see a comment about be prepared for the year with access to resources. Know what your university has. And just be prepared that people might disclose some heavy things. That's a really smart thing to keep in mind. You don't know what they're going to say. And you don't want to be burdened with that. I think that's such a smart comment, just thinking ahead, really. So having that list of resources. I was just in an Overture Q&A the other day, and it's a requirement to have a list of all resources in your chapter's membership education plan. So if you need that list of resources, your VPM should have already located it. And that's it, folks. Thank you so much for staying on. I'm sorry that this ran long, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope it was valuable to you. Does anyone have any other questions or no? I hope no concerns. If there are none, we can stop the recording and I will stop sharing. And I am happy to stay on for a couple minutes if